Let's open our Bibles together to the 11th chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes 11. Two Sundays ago, I began a series themed Learning to Float. And for this, now the third of 4 Sundays, because next Sunday I'm going to pursue that theme further, we've dealt with things in the Bible that float and the principles related to them. This is not just a clever idea. The idea of floating is essentially there's a required surrender to something. Surrender to the water, to rest in the water. And I began by describing that you never really learn how to swim until you learn how to float. And swimming is a good analogy because the Lord calls you and me further than you can get in another environment. You and I can walk a long way under our own steam if we're on land, but water is not our environment unless we learn to float, for starters. And there's a realm of growth and development and expansion with God that if you care about it, if you don't care about it, this is not important. But I don't figure that people come to church on Sunday morning who don't much care about it. That's the nice thing about being in my position is you're talking to people who care. That's why they're there. And at least I think that's true. Is that so? Amen. Well, it's about half of us. Is that so? Yes. We got up about 87% right there. One more stab at it. Is that true? Yes. Yeah. Is what true? Someone's asking. I wasn't listening when you raised the question, you know. Is what is true, what I just said was that you would make a $5,000 pledge, I would say. I intentionally want to say that, of course, in jest, because this is a message that has to do very much with giving. It has to do with how we give. And there's got to be somebody that brought a friend to church today who said their friend said they wouldn't come. They've been inviting them for months, if not years, and they said, I'm never going to go. I used to go to church every time I went to church, they asked for money. And they finally came today. And I'm not going to ask for money today, but I will talk about it. But it's not all I'm talking about. In the 11th chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes, verse 1, an often quoted verse, often quoted by people that don't even know it's in the Bible. Verse 1, Ecclesiastes 11, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. In other words, serve people, give 7, give 8, because you don't know. There may not be any resource tomorrow. So serve while you've got it. Give what you have. Give something to give now. Same thing continues. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there shall it lie. I don't want to take time to talk about the basic idea says you'll set the course that you're going to be on the way you determine to respond to the wind. The tree establishes direction. And there is a breath of the Spirit, there's a breath of adversity. How do you relate to the winds of adversity? How do you relate to the winds of the Spirit? Because the way you fall, that's the way you're going to go, the way you commit yourself. Verse 4, he who observes the wind, now it's talking about it another way, he who observes the wind will not sow. Why? He was talking about a culture where people go out and they'd sow the seed, the wind blow the seed away. So why sow? Oh, it's blowing too much, can't go sow now. You're not going to have a harvest later if you don't sow during the time, even when it's adverse times, but you need to sow now. The rest of verse 4, he who regards the clouds will not reap. Well, we can't go out and harvest today because it looks like it's going to rain. He's never going to get a harvest. You're controlled by the winds, by the apparent rains, and you don't move, then you're not going to get what it is that needs to be taken care of business-wise. Verse 5, as you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with a child, so you don't know the works of God who makes everything. Because you don't know the way the wind's going to blow, and you don't even know how the creative works of God bring things into being as with a child in the womb. And it's something that though it can be observed and analyzed, the finest diagnosis does not provide an adequate explanation for the miracle. Verse 6, in the morning sow your seed. In the evening do not withhold your hand. That means from sowing. For you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Read verse 1 with me again, will you? Let's read it all aloud and together 2 times, will you? Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Once more. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. I have a shelf in my office that has a number of things on it that are very special memorabilia. There's stories behind them. Some of them are really quite priceless. There are things that are priceless because there's no way to replace them. There's things that are priceless because they're quite valuable. I have a beautiful piece of the Berlin Wall that was given to me by someone, and that's a treasure. It's a treasure of a memory. It'd be costly because it's a pretty good-sized piece. It's not just a little chunk. It's a good-sized piece. I have a cup that nobody claims Abraham drank from it, but it's old enough for him to. That means 4,000 years old from the Canaanitish culture of that ancient day. It's obviously an archaeological find. It's a very valuable piece. It's on the same shelf as this. A lot of you recognize this kind of an offering bag that is used in some churches, even today. I never attended a church that used these all the time, but I've been to churches that did. I never liked them. I don't know, something about, maybe just the word bag. They say, we're gonna pass the bag, just plates sound so much better to me. But anyway, it's not too material to the point. This particular bag may actually be the one that was involved in the story that I'm going to tell you. It's highly probable because there were only 8 in that church. And where I'm going to tell you the story, years after it happened in the early 1970s, the story I'm going to tell you, years after that, my brother's 10 years younger than me, and he's a pastor. Most of you know that. He's a very successful pastor in Seattle. And my brother was pastoring at this church on the California coast. He came to that pastorate, and they did some remodeling. At the same time, they got some new offering. They got offering plates. And he had heard me tell the story I'm going to tell you. And so he sent me one of these because he said, I thought you'd like to have one of those because of that story. Well, it's one of those things that's on that shelf in my office. It's a treasure of a memory. Anna and I had headed out up on the coast for a gathering of about 250 pastors. And I wasn't the speaker. Usually in these kind of things when we travel, I'm speaking, but I was just another pastor from the area going to the conference, and it was very exciting to us because it was a good chance to get away. It was going to be at a beautiful site. Our expenses were covered by the church for the registration and accommodation, and our church council had also given us $100. Now this is 1971, 72, and so probably worth about 2.5 times as much. It'd be like having $200 or $300 just to go, and in the 3 days you're away, you just have some monies for your meals and to just relax and have a nice time, Pastor and Anna, and we were looking forward to it. So it was a neat thing. On the way out of town, I bought I got the car gassed, and we were on our way up. So I'd already started cutting in money. By now, I remember very clearly, and this will give you a feeling for the relative value of money, to fill the car up, and it was mostly empty, only cost between $7 and $8. So for something that would probably cost $17 today, or $17, $18. So it was, I'd had $3 or $4 or $5 singles in my wallet before I put the 100 in. So now I don't know exactly how much I had, but it was around $100 after paid for the gas, just a little bit less. And we got to the meeting, and we got situated in our hotel, and the first meeting is Monday night, and so we go to the church where the meeting's taking place, and the praise and everything going on, and they got up to take an offering. And so when the leader of the service invited to take an offering, my mind processed it this way. And I don't want to sound kind of disgustingly noble. This has to do with in any of what I'm going to tell you, because these are things where I've been walking with the Lord for quite a long time by the time this happened, so I understood God's ways and was reasonably obedient and in faith, take steps of faith in giving. But here's what happened. Well, when they first said they're going to take an offering, my first thought really was kind of almost logistic. If I was running this conference, I don't even think I'd take an offering. They charged registration. This is a group of pastors. Registration ought to have been enough to cover the expenses. Why even take an offering at this? But then I immediately processed back, but it's always good to give. So that's a reason to take an offering. So since it's good to give, then I'll give in the offering. But then the next thing is, but since I've already paid registration and I've got this money, I'm not going to give a really lavish offering because, after all, they don't really need it. You know. And so I've already got in my mind, I'm going to give a couple dollars. But then I debate myself and rebut that and come back thinking, no, I know better than that. You should give better than that. So I decided, I'm going to give $5. So I was all ready to do, I'm just reaching in the wallet. Just reaching in the wallet right now to get ready. And so all this was going on while they were praying over the offering. Tell somebody next to you, it's always dangerous to seriously pray over an offering. Tell somebody. Go ahead. And there are people who never want to pray about an offering because they're afraid that God may, in fact, deal with them about giving. And he did with me. Because I was reaching in to get the $5 bill, and as clearly as ever in my life, the Lord impressed me. Give it all. Get thee behind me, Satan. You know. You ever felt that? You know, I didn't say that. I didn't say that because I knew it wasn't the devil. And I'll tell you, the devil will never tell you to give anything to God, much less everything. So it wasn't the devil. Just the Lord saying, do this. Now, I want you to know, and here's where I don't want to sound like I just think I'm Mr. Wonderful in obedience, because you grow to points where certain things become policy issues with you. Just like I wouldn't let myself just give to, though really the conference didn't need anything as far as I knew, but it was good practice in worship to give. And so I'd already decided to give $5. But when the Lord said, give it all, for me it was a done deal right then. And it's not because it doesn't mean it doesn't take faith. It's just that I've walked this way with the Lord long enough. He says, give it all. My mind is thinking, we've got 3 days we're going to be here. We've got lunch every day. We've got dinners in the evening. We were going to take some friends one night to dinner. Says, I'm reasonable. I'm not stupid. And they're thinking, how do you cover that? And I just thought, I don't know how, but the Lord will take care of us. It'll work out. And I'll just, without telling how, it did work out. But there was the moment, so I'd made up my mind. Now, the funniest thing happened. Now, the offering plate is now, we're in the third row, and I'm about second or third person, Anna's next to me from the end of the row. And the offering plate, these bags are already going along. So now, while I'm about this time, so we're up close to the front, and the offering is being received from the front of the room, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to give this, but there was some reason that it seemed important to me. I wanted to know how much I was actually giving. And I've got it's quite a wad of cash, because I think I had 5 20s and a few ones when I started. Then there was the change from the gas station. And there's probably 8 or 10 bills in there. And it's about probably $97, $98, but I wanted to count it. I didn't want to get out and kind of fan it in front of the congregation, you know. It's a matter of just, I'm in my wallet, and I start to look at it, and the plate's getting real close now. It's right here at the end of that row, and it's about to come to me, and I haven't had a chance to count it. And that's when the Lord spoke to me the second time. He had said, give it all. And he said, when you give everything, it doesn't make any difference how much it is. It's everything. It was a tremendously moving statement to me. I just took it out and put it in the bag. I was kind of glad they had bags, because it was a wad of cash, and it looked kind of ostentatious to, you know, even if you didn't make a display, still the people on either side had seen there'd been a hole, and I could just stuff it down in there and made the gift and did. And when you give everything, it doesn't make any difference how much it is. It's everything. So that surrender is really the issue always. Let go. It's the let go. It's not that God always says you have to give everything. In fact, in His Word, He doesn't ask for all of our money all the time. That wasn't even all my money. That's just all I had right there, right then. It's all I had for that event. You know, God's not going to strip you bare. That's not what He does. But He does call for us to let go, to cast your bread on the waters. And boy, you know how we would cast the bread on there it goes. Well, that was a tremendous, tremendous victory. Let me tell you another thing that happened. It was Thursday noon. That's when the conference got over. Been a marvelous session in the morning, and at the end, the speaker was a man that his wife had had strong influence on Anna's and my life and ministry. He'd just died at age 93, just a few months ago. Dr. Harold Jeffries, great, godly leader, and we love them dearly. And he'd spoken, and a lot of people had come forward to pray at the end, and Anna and I were up there with others just kneeling and praying. And the crowd had started to dissipate, people heading for their cars and heading home. And we'd stopped to talk to Dr. and Mrs. Jeffries for a few minutes, and then we'd turn around and started to leave. And there's not very many people left in the sanctuary now. And I started to go out the side door over here toward where my car was, and there was a woman come down the aisle that called me. And I immediately recognized her, an elderly woman who was a retired missionary from Latin America. And I knew her from the years I was National Youth Director in our denomination, and she's just a dear, dear, dear saint of God, greatly used of the Lord, now in her advanced years and retired in that area where that church is, and so she happened to be at the conference because, in fact, it's the church she attended. And she called me. She said, "Jack, wait just a minute." So Anna and I stopped, and she came up, and she said, "While I was sitting back there earlier in the service, the Lord impressed me to give this to you." And she reached over, and she had a bill folded up in her hand, and when she put it in my hand, I couldn't see how much it was, but I could see that it was money, and I just took her hand right back, and I said, I thank you, that's so, I can't accept that. I said, "You are just so precious." And there's a woman, I know she didn't have a whole lot. And it was a hard thing. She said, "Jack," she said, "you and I both know the Lord's ways. The Lord told me to do this, now you receive this." Well, I not only knew the Lord's ways, but I knew that there was no way in the world God was going to hurt this woman. And so I received it with gratitude, and I was humbled by her love, and Anna and I left. I just put it in my pocket, and later on we got in the car and we were on our way home. I pulled it out. It was a $100 bill. Well, you say, I hear these stories all the time. Yeah, you do. You do. And they're true. And they're not contrived, and nobody, please understand, I didn't give the money that Monday night because I figured by Thursday I'd get it back. And you don't do that. You give because you give. You cast the bread on the water and let the flow. You learn to float investments with God. You learn to float it, just let it go. And you find out that with God, it always floats back, even if it seems that it has to come back upstream against the current of things. That's not the end of that story, by the way. We got in the car and we had this, and Anna says, "Honey, you really do need to get another suit, and why don't you take that?" Because now everything had been taken care of through the week, so we didn't need to repay anything. This was all fresh, new money. And so she said, "Why don't you go buy a suit?" Well, for $100, you could get a fairly decent suit at that time. It wouldn't have been the nicest, but it had been adequate. And we had a young family. We were pastoring a small church that was this one when it was small. And we had 4 kids at home. And they were just all, there's just not a whole lot of money to go around. And this was kind of a godsend. So she said, "Go ahead." Well, the next week, Monday or Tuesday, I don't remember which day, I went down on Van Nuys Boulevard, and there was a Penny's down there. And I went over, and there was a sale rack. And so I was really pleased to see that because you get a better deal anyway, and walked over. And a suit like this probably would cost maybe $139.95, something like that. On sale, you might get it for $99, but it was on sale for $47.95. $47.95. This is a deal. Now there's this rack. So I'm looking through the rack, and there was one suit different than all the rest of the suits on the rack. Very, very fine material. Really, really nice. The others were kind of a tweed, and this had a real nice dark, solid color. That is a light design, and it was really a nice suit. And it was on this same rack, and it was different than the rest. And when I looked, it was my size. The odds of one suit that's really nice being your size is a big enough deal anyway. And I thought, and I looked at it, I said, why is this suit different? I looked at the tag, it was stapled on there, it was the same as all the rest, $47.95. Saw it was my size, it was, wow. And I've still got money left over to buy shoes and a tie, and I needed shoes bad. And so I took it over to the clerk, I laid it down, and when she looked at it, she flipped the thing. It was clear she was surprised when she saw the tag that was on it. And she said, where did you get the suit? And I said, it was on that rack over there. She said, I was surprised to see it too. She said, well, sir, she said, this, you're going to get it because the tag's on it, and that's right. But she said, this didn't belong on that rack. She said, this is the finest suit we have in the house. This is the top of the line. She said, I don't have any idea how it got on that rack, but you got our best suit. So I got what would today, I suppose, be $350, $450 suit in the average store. If you're not getting something tailored special, it was incredible. In those days, in fact, I still generally can buy things off the rack, although they don't immediately fit quite as well as they did then. Cast your bread upon the waters. This text is taken from a book that is the least spiritual book in the Bible. I want to, in fact, go to the first point there, will you? It's a concept that you find in a place where it says throughout this book, this is not the heavenly perspective. It puts it in these words, life that is lived under the sun, man under the sun. It's a spiritual record of an unspiritual viewpoint. That's what the book of Ecclesiastes is. Look at this. Ecclesiastes is God's preserved record of the timelessly unchanging attitudes of the flesh. Those attitudes are twofold. It contrasts earth's limited thinking with heaven's, and it summarizes temporal fulfillment with eternal. That kind of summarizes the book of Ecclesiastes. You said, now wait a minute, do I understand you saying this is an unspiritual book? No. It's a spiritual record because God's Holy Spirit recorded it, but it's recording the earth perspective, the human perspective. Well, why would God do that? Main reason is because today, God knew we'd come to today. It's been 3,000 years since the book was written. And so God has in His Word a record that says people never get over thinking this way. This is not a come-lately way of thinking. And you read Solomon's words, and this is at a time, he wrote this at a time in his life now, that Solomon had tested and tried about everything. And while Solomon had gained wisdom, he didn't always function wisely. And that's a subject that's really worth investigation. There's a lot of people that know a whole lot better than they do. Might even be one sitting very near you. Who knows, even in your seat. They know better than they do. Solomon, time and again in the book of Ecclesiastes says, so I tried this on for size. And I found out that you can do all that seems to be pleasure and fulfillment. You can do all this that seems to be gain and prosperity. You can do all this and all these things. And he said, and I learned these things, that when it's all said and done, you end up with man under the sun. It all ends up being relatively pointless. From the earthly perspective, without a heavenly quality in the life, it ends up pointless. And the stories abound around us. The worst case scenario is we read in the headlines of our newspapers of famous people that just cash it all in. Or people that have been renowned and wonderful, but they don't really have the fulfillment that they'd like. It all looks good for a while. And it's not some kind of a dour attitude of heaven toward earth. It's not saying that life cannot be lived on an earthly plane and be fulfilling. It's saying that it can only be fulfilling if it's lived from heaven's perspective. That there's more than just the earth plane perspective. Well, in this context of this whole book, this verse shines out where Solomon is not saying anything negative about this. He's making an observation, and I choose this of my text instead of any one of a half dozen really outstanding texts we could take on the concept of letting go, releasing. The spirit of giving taking hold of your heart so you could learn the release that happens there. Not just giving money. Giving in the attitude of let go and toward giving forgiveness. The word give is within it. How many people withhold forgiveness? Giving time. I mean, well, I'm so busy, I just don't have time to, and their kids don't get time. And you'd be amazed to find if you gave the kids or gave your wife or gave your husband time that you think you don't have, you'd be amazed that if you cast that bread of time on the waters that it'd come back and you'd end up with more time than you thought you had. It all has to do with our sense of that we know how to control life rather than to give the things that most count. To give time, to give care, to give service to give patience towards somebody that really becomes an irritant to you. You say, so you look for ways to avoid involvement or just push them away and find out if I would just give a little time, maybe I'd resolve a whole lot and find some degree of fulfillment at the same time. And the same with giving freely and obediently, not just freely, just obediently. Because obedient giving precedes really free giving. People never become freed in their giving until there comes obedience to the beginning point with God. I want to talk about that in a second, but right now, just take a minute about Solomon's perspective. Now, this text actually, most Bible commentators and scholars say the reason that he uses the figure of casting bread upon the waters was because of something that developed under Solomon's leadership during the time he was king of Israel. And it had been a very closed culture with very little international trade until Solomon's time. But there's actual record in the book of 1 Kings and in 2 Chronicles. There's actual record in the Bible of how Solomon pioneered a good deal of international trade and became very successful at it. And when he says, cast your bread upon the waters, what he's really talking about is there was no place to make investment that would involve going across waters within the land of Israel. This would mean this was international. In other words, he's talking about international investments. That's what he was talking about. Going to a realm of another culture where you don't have the security that you're in the same control as you have if it's under your own kingdom's operation. And every time you and I are called to give on God's terms, we're entering into another realm where we don't have control. Where you say, Lord, I'm going to give this, and it's out of my control now. Into the realm of another kingdom. It's not under my immediate control. How many people give and still retain it under their control? I think one of the, I don't want to make much out of this because I want to speak unkindly of a person that was doing a good work, but there was a very famous, enormous gift given recently by one of our globe's billionaires. And when you analyze the space of time he was making the gift over, that actually only is the equivalent of the interest on what his holdings are anyway. It really does not constitute a gift, though it's a gift. But it doesn't constitute anything more than just retaining everything you have and just giving away interest. Now you say, well, that's noble enough, and I agree. Also impressed that if that would have been done and the gift made to a religious institution, there would have been no end of complaint about what a wasteful thing it was done. But that's another thing. The point is that it's kept under control. Still gift, noble, thoughtful, it'll be helpful, but really wasn't really a free gift. It's a controlled gift. When Solomon talks about casting your bread on the waters, he's saying, we're talking about risking capital with God. That's what we're talking about. And the Bible emphasizes this over and over again and says that if you do that, there will always be return. It's a principle that's woven through the Scriptures. Go on down to the second point quickly, if you will. In the Bible, we see the practical power of an impractical proposition. The proposition is release, control, freely give up, or let go and give it up. And there's a cluster of texts on this. God's Word abounds on this point. And the laws of sowing and reaping are emphasized in the Bible. And basically it says that you never learn for things to really begin to happen until you learn to let go. In fact, a really good figure is understood, I think, by about everybody. We live in the day of the automatic transmission, And not everybody may get it, but there's enough cars still that have the car with a clutch and having to put the thing in gear that people will get what you mean. When I say to you that you never really, in fact, would you say to somebody these words? Would you say, you really never get in gear until you let go of the clutch? They'll know what you're talking about. Go ahead. There's something about let go that makes space for God to do what he wants in our funds. So that you have verses like Proverbs 11, verse 24, that says, there is that which withholds and tends to poverty, and there is that which releases and gives away and tends to abundance. It violates the law. So if I keep it, then I'll have it. It says, don't fool yourself. There's that releases and tends to abound. In the book of Malachi, there is the baseline of giving, the biblical baseline of giving. And matter of fact, on the standards of God's word, we haven't even given until we have started at 10%. This is God. I didn't make this up. So you mean nothing else is a gift? It's not a gift of any step of faith to God. It may be kind. Not saying it's not kind. Just like the gift that I referenced that I didn't name the person or didn't recite details on it, just like they're basically just giving interest over a 10-year period, it's a gift. But there's no spiritual nobility to it. And there's not going to be any spiritual reward from it because it doesn't qualify. You mean you buy God's favor? No. You never buy God's favor. You step into the place where you cast the bread out, and it's only when it's been let go, where you learn to float it. Learn to float the investment of venturing with God. That's the only time that ever then it really is in the space where it can flow back. As long as I've got strings on it or points of control, then it never gets to develop what it could develop. It doesn't mean that it's not good or nice. You just say, well, I gave this to the Red Cross and I did this. In fact, I gave some money. In fact, I give about 4% of my income to the church. Well, God bless you. I'm thankful, and I don't think that God sneers at you. The point is, it's not God saying, that's an unworthy gift, I don't like that one. It's that you never break into the arena, that the law goes into action as long as the clutch is still in. And that's all there is to it. Doesn't have anything to do with whether God loves you. Doesn't have anything to do with whether you're going to go to heaven. Doesn't have anything to do with whether Jesus is building a mansion for you. Doesn't have anything to do with your salvation. It doesn't have anything to do with anything except whether you learn how it works with a release of God's bounty in not only funds, but in other areas of life. For example, this is a life principle. A member of our congregation recently wrote me, a woman about 70 years of age. And she's a brilliant and a very active, vital lady. And she was just so excited when she wrote about this. She said, the Lord just taught me this principle, and she was talking about the idea of release and sowing and reaping. And this is what, she's a person that would never think of not giving tithes and offerings as well. So it didn't have to do with money. She said, where I live, when I go out, and she has a job even at her age, she's got a second job later in life after she retired because she's just a very active person. And she said, where I head out from my house in the morning, to come out of my driveway, she said, it's a busy street, and the curb lane is opened on the early hours of the morning for traffic that goes there. So she said the most difficult thing for me is to nose out of my driveway and get into the flow of traffic, because just about 4 car lengths away there's the intersection, and the cars are backed up, they're waiting for the light, and I just can't get in, nobody lets me in. And she said, I found myself becoming increasingly irritated with this. And finally, I'd find you just kind of crowd a little bit more till finally somebody almost has to stop at the risk of taking off your bumper. But it's amazing how many people will just kind of edge around and look at you like you were intruding on them. And, we've all experienced it. And so she said, I found I was starting to kind of feel myself like, I don't want to lose my place in line. She said, I even discovered that then I would be going by people in a similar situation, and I would drive on by them knowing how much it frustrated me that I didn't stop for them either. And one day, the Holy Spirit dealt with me about that. And she said, he didn't quote the verse, but it was sort of a basically, as you do to your neighbor, do to your neighbor what you'd like done to you. So she said, I just stopped and let a person in. And I decided I'm going to do this. Over the next couple of weeks, she said, probably had a half a dozen occasions where I noticed, I might have missed some I didn't see, but where I noticed, here, slow down, let that person in who's waiting to get in or waiting to move over a lane in front of me. Go ahead and give the space. And she said, Pastor, as God's my witness, she said, all the time for the last 2 or 3 months, when I pull up to start on my driveway in the morning, almost always people stop for me. Whereas it almost never happened before. It happens all the time now. Now, you know as well as I do, those people aren't thinking, oh, that's the lady that stops for people now, so I'll stop for her. You know, there's nobody thinking that. So why does it happen? Well, actually, it isn't happening. Somebody says it just seems like that to her because something's happened inside her. I doubt it. What we're dealing with is a basic life principle. We're dealing with a principle that it works. I was speaking years ago to one of the most, he's become a solid disciple of Christ now. At that time, he knew the Lord, but he didn't have any disciples, real discipling and understanding in his life of the Lord's ways. And I was talking to him about his business, one of the most successful businessmen in this country. And how I got involved in his life is an interesting story, but when I was asking him to tell me some about his business, and when he did, I counted 5 major principles that he observed that were biblical principles. I said, you realize the reason you succeed is those business principles are based in God's Word? And I named them off. He says, I didn't know that. I just felt it was the right thing to do. Well, he didn't do it for godly reasons. He did it because it made sense, and it tells you something about the way the Lord's ways work. And since then, he's become a strong disciple and has added other things in the way he lives his life that are even constantly expanded, not just his business success, but other parts of his life that, for the most part, become impacting for Christ as well as for commerce. But the point is that these principles work in life. Now, there's somebody sitting here this morning, and you're living under a cloud. You're living under a cloud of just kind of the heaviness. It's hard to get over feeling condemnation in your soul, though you know the Lord. And if that's the way that you feel and live, let me ask you a question. Have you asked the Lord lately who you need to forgive? Because there are people that carry a burden of guilt themselves that they can't understand, and it's because there's a place that you have never released the spirit of forgiveness towards somebody else. Listen, please. That doesn't mean God hasn't forgiven you. It means you're not enjoying the benefits of forgiveness because you're unforgiving. The benefits of the forgiveness you have, because you're unforgiving. There's people, as I said earlier, you don't take time with the kids because you don't have time to take time with the kids, or time to sit down with your spouse and to just work on your relationship, just giving a little time to each other because you're both so busy. And you just, if you prioritize the right thing, you'd be amazed how the time multiplies. But you have to decide to take the initiative. You cast your bread on the waters. Instead of operating from the human plane of perceived control, come to a principle that I use from Ecclesiastes because it's something that Solomon said not even for a spiritual reason. In the whole text of Ecclesiastes, he's saying, this didn't work, this didn't work, this didn't work. He says, by the way, this does. Here's something that works. And you cast your bread. And he says, you can keep control all the time. He says, the wind's blowing too much, don't sow today. Looks like it's going to rain, don't harvest now. He says, but you can't control those things. So just move and venture out. Venture out. Let there come release. There's another story. Let me show you that. I don't know if you know what these are. These are Beanie Babies. If you don't know one, this is them. This is a Princess Di Beanie Baby. This is one called Aaron. And these Beanie Babies are these are treasures today. These cost $6.50 each. But either of these right now in the collector's market are worth, because they're scarce, are worth, some people give $200 to $300 for them. Either one. It's just astounding. People, of course, we're in a big collection now on Beanie Babies. And So these Beanie Babies belong to a young man in our church. He's 12 years old. Let me tell you about him. He has cerebral palsy, and it's because there was brain hemorrhage at birth. He was 3 months premature, and the doctors not only didn't expect him to live, his twin brother didn't, but the doctors didn't expect him to live. And when it looked like there was a slight hope of survival early on, his folks, Bruce and Leanne Holmes, are part of our congregation at the time. They've been in the church for over 15, 16 years. They have twin daughters who are 15 or 16, and they've been in the church all this time. Girls are in the high school department, and Tim will go into the junior high department this next year. And at the time, the doctors said, you know, if this child even survives forever, how long he survives, which we don't expect would be long, he would be vegetable-like, so we don't want you to hold any hope. And as you'll shortly see, well, he's anything but vegetable-like, but God did a great thing. But he does have cerebral palsy as a result of that ordeal at the time of his birth. Well, Tim collects Beanie Babies, and this is a common thing for kids to do today. And as you'll shortly see in a news report, it's like winning the lottery, get one of these. And that's exactly what had happened on the Beanie Baby, not this one. But you couldn't get a Princess Di, but you could put your name in for drawings at stores that sold them, and then if your name happened to be drawn, then you could buy one. It only cost $6.50 if your name was drawn, but there were so many requests, like there'd be hundreds and hundreds of requests, and the store owner would just get a small stock. So this happened, and his name was drawn. Well, it was about that time last March, and you'll remember when there was that helicopter crash and 3 LA Fire Department guys were killed as they were seeking to rescue this little girl, get her to the hospital. And Tim saw that on the news, and he was terrifically touched. Just moved this 12-year-old kid, and he says to his mom, who was with him in the room at the time, he says, "Mom, I really want to do something." And they talked about what could be done, and he had the idea. Says, you know, I just got the call that I won the Beanie Baby, the right to buy a Beanie Baby. Because there's so many people like that. Why don't I just take my Beanie Baby, tell the store owner, the Princess Di one, tell her, why don't you put this up for a drawing and say that the drawing is for money for the fund for the firemen's families who were killed. Well, the store owner was very responsive to that, and it set in motion some things. And it's summarized really faster than I can summarize it in 2 news reports that were over Channel 11. This has been on most channels by now, and some of you may have seen it. But I want you to just it takes 3 minutes and 45 seconds to see these two news reports. Look at here.
When it comes from the heart, giving is much better than receiving. Barbara Schroeder has a story of a young collector moved by a family's tragedy.
This cute purple bear is hardly one of the necessities of life unless you're a Beanie Baby collector who owns
about 60.
Tim Holmes, who has cerebral palsy, is 12 years old. He clearly remembers getting his first beanie.
It was Bongo the monkey.
And this was his most recent, a rare and much sought-after special edition Princess Diana Memorial Bear, worth about $300. He just got it a few weeks ago in a drawing at the Victoria's Cottage store in Santa Clarita.
I was beyond excited.
But the other day, when he saw the horrific news of the little girl in the car accident who died in the helicopter crash on the way to the hospital, along with several firefighters, he came up with a plan. Tim wanted to give the bear back, auction him off, and give the money to the families of the victims.
Timmy's so special, and he wanted the bear so bad, you know, and we had 11 pages of people that wanted the bear, and he was picked from that, and he was so excited. And then for him to be able to give it up is really neat for someone else.
So now the little bear that brought Tim so much joy will do it again for the customers already buying the raffle tickets and for the families of the victims who will no doubt, we told Tim, want to say thank you.
What would you say if they say, Tim, thank you, that's a really wonderful thing?
You're welcome.
In Santa Clarita, Barbara Schroeder, Fox 11 News.
Oh, that touches my heart.
That is a lovely story. Yeah.
That boy's being raised right.
This is a wonderful story. Last week we told you about a little boy who gave away a very special collector's item to raise money for the families of the victims of the helicopter crash. Well, somebody was watching when that report was run, and because of his generosity, the boy was honored in a way he never could have imagined. And Barbara Schroeder brings us this wonderful story.
You're looking at two rare Beanie Baby bears. Ask any kid who collects them. Owning one of these, the coveted purple Princess Diana and the green Aaron bear, is like winning the lottery. And this young boy, Tim, who has cerebral palsy, used to have a coveted purple beanie. But he was so touched by a news story about a little girl and 3 rescue workers dying in a helicopter crash, he gave his beanie away so that it could be auctioned off to raise money for the families. His story so moved one of our viewers, boxing great Sugar Ray Leonard, that he asked us if we could introduce him to Tim.
This was one of my main fights. I beat Marvin Hagler, a guy who was pretty tough.
They met at Planet Hollywood.
He exemplified what it is to be a champion and a real fighter. I mean, to take his prized possession and to give that, a little girl who died in that
Helicopter crash.
Yeah, that was very generous and very heartfelt.
And with that, Sugar Ray Leonard took one of his prized possessions, a personal boxing robe, and gave it to Tim.
Is it pretty cool that a celebrity wants to meet you?
Then there was another viewer who was overcome with emotion. Elena Lavallee had something for Tim, too. Not only would he get back a bear like the one he gave away.
I know you were auctioning off the princess bear.
But he was also about to get the bear he wanted more than anything else, the green one.
You're an inspiration for me as an adult and for kids as well. I think that deserves something extra.
In Tim's words, he went hog wild. It was, he said simply, the best day of his life.
I am so grateful. I can't believe this.
Sometimes it takes a little boy to show us just how wonderful it is to give. In Beverly Hills, Barbara Schroeder, Good Day, LA.
I want you to meet Tim Holmes. Come over here. Tim. Come around. It's kind of exciting. Well, Tim, you traded, and this is the Holmes family, his twin sisters, and Leanne and Bruce, and the Lord put on your heart just that sense, I want to help. So you gave away what was a treasure to you. And when I think the thing that's amazing to me, just this principle, two things have happened beside this. The $6.50 Beanie Baby you put in, and they had the drawing. How much money was given to the Firemen's Relief Fund?
$3,445.
And I haven't figured out what that multiplies out to, but it's sure a whole lot more than 100-fold. And
it's probably over 1,000 apiece for the 3 families.
When,
almost
1,000. Now here's another incredible.
That's 6 beanies in there.
There's 6 Princess Di Beanie Babies in here. There's what, 4 more on their way? People that have
3 more on the way.
3 more on the way. There have been given back to him since he
12.
gave the one. How many?
12.
12. 12 Princess Di Beanie Babies. Cannot believe it. And I want to say some of those they have already given away because they're not coveting all these for themselves, but they've used these in a ministry sense in a very touching way that I'm not even getting in to describe. I'll put that back over there. Excuse me, Tim. Tell me, you know, when I saw this, I mean, I really like this robe. And, you know, I haven't been in a tragedy of any kind, but you know, I could use a Tim Holmes gift.
It actually fits.
What do you think? What do you think?
It's a bit short. Just by a few.
You know, Timmy, I was hoping that you would have really listened close to this sermon. You never know. You give me this robe, you may get a whole lot of them. In fact, you know, if you just let go, it may even get longer. You know?
Yeah, right.
Well, listen, I want to tell you, it was a wise man, a king, who said this principle we're talking about, and as you have been robed here, it's something kind of regal about that. And I think that it's sort of a robe that says, here's a guy that's learned something early in life. And I am particularly impressed with the words of the commentator after that first interview that said...
that boy's being raised right?
That's right. What do you think, huh? I've experienced the greatest trust in the world. Yesterday I drove out to their house so I could pick up the Beanie Babies because I needed to use them last night. And I was given the robe in trust, 2 Beanie Babies in trust. And just to verify my trustworthiness, you can now have them back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timmy, for helping teach us the law of sowing and reaping, of liberation. Thank them, will you please? God bless you. God bless you guys. Especially appreciate their coming to all 3 services last night and both times this morning. But they're regular in our church all the time anyway. And go ahead, thank them again. Keep praying about that robe, Tim. God may deal with you. This morning, there are two objectives of this message beside the obvious, just teaching the Word of God and the principles it holds. The first one is wrapped up in the real desire that people learn the liberty that comes through letting go. We're not talking about the world's system of let go, turn your horses loose in an undisciplined way, but in the disciples' way of giving the Lord's way. There's decisions that quite a number of people are going to make this morning. That's whether you're willing to open up to a call of the Word of God that says, even an ancient king whose life had become dominated by earth plane thinking, he said, this one works even if you're only thinking from the earth plane point of view. But what unleashes when you function in obedience to heaven's plane of summons to us, heaven's call? I really don't want to let anybody go today without crowding you to evaluate where you are. How much are you hungry for of God's release in your life, in the spirit of forgiveness, in the way your time works, even in the attitude you show in a traffic-clogged Los Angeles County? How redemptive will you let the Lord be through you and in your income and giving? There's another lesser issue. It's not unimportant. But within the next 2 weeks, you're going to get a letter from me. And the letter's basically going to say, here's a challenge we face as a congregation this summer. Would you give extra for it to be met? And I'll be asking for you to give more than you already give, because if you just redirect what you're giving already to this, then we obviously will get behind in one area while we're trying to advance in another. Most everyone in our church knows that we are a very generous church because it's filled with generous people. And we give away. Our church gives away between 22 and 25% of everything that comes in. We give away every year into ministry outside and beyond us. We give it away. So we don't clutch ourselves as a church. And because of that, when we do ask for special focus, sometimes there's some people that get a little nervous and they wonder, well, are we becoming self-focused? Because I'm going to be asking the actual figure I'm going to get this week of what we need, because it's still being computed. We've got things we need to do, we want to do, and I'll explain it in the letter, but we're going to need probably between $600,000 and $800,000. For a congregation our size, that's a fairly small amount of money. But when it's extra, it's a lot of money on any terms, when it's extra. And believe me, I don't even have a dream that we would even get a fourth of it unless there was just the spirit of faith and God's ways work. Release, anticipation. Watch what God can do. So you'll receive a letter from me. Now, I never preach a message just for the sake of following it up with a letter. Preach a message because it's a principle for life, but it times very well with this particular matter that I'll write you about. So when it comes, remember the Word of God.